So an emergency session of Congress has just been called, and the word echoing through every corridor of Capitol Hill is that Trump could face immediate removal from office. The tension in Washington has reached a breaking point and nobody thought possible just weeks ago. But here's what absolutely nobody saw coming: the twist that has turned this constitutional crisis into something unprecedented in American history. Elon Musk, the man who once stood proudly beside Trump at Mar-a-Lago, celebrating their powerful alliance, the billionaire who transformed Twitter into X and gave Trump an uncensored megaphone to the world, just dropped a bombshell statement that's sending shockwaves through Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and Washington, all at once. It's honestly hard to believe he posted that. The techno king of Tesla, the visionary behind SpaceX, the man who literally owns the platform where political battles are fought daily, and who dreams of colonizing Mars, just declared that the constitutional crisis has reached a point where innovation itself is under threat. He wrote, and let me paraphrase here, that you cannot build the future on the ruins of democratic institutions. He emphasized that rockets cannot launch from a nation in chaos, that electric vehicles cannot transform transportation in a country without stable governance, and that the dream of becoming a multiplanetary species means nothing if we destroy the planet we're trying to leave behind. This isn't just about politics anymore. We're talking about the very foundations of American democracy, the tech ecosystem, and apparently the entire trajectory of human civilization, according to Musk. And trust me, when Elon Musk starts tweeting about constitutional crisis instead of rockets, electric cars, and neural interfaces, the entire world stops and pays attention. His post already has over 200 million views in less than 4 hours, making it one of the most viral political statements in the history of social media. Let me fill you in on exactly what's been happening and how we got to this extraordinary moment. Donald Trump returned to the presidency in January 2025 after defeating Kamala Harris in what was one of the most divisive elections in American history. From the very first day of his second term, he seemed determined to reshape the federal government in ways we've never seen before, ways that would make his first term look tame by comparison. Whether it was firing inspectors general across multiple agencies, replacing career civil servants with personal loyalists who pledged allegiance to him rather than the Constitution, or attempting to bypass Congress on critical budget matters, Trump really cemented himself as someone who views constitutional constraints as mere suggestions rather than binding law. His supporters called it draining the swamp. His critics called it dismantling democracy. But whatever you call it, the effects were immediate and dramatic. But here's where the rubber meets the road, and where everything exploded into the crisis we're witnessing today. We're now 4 weeks into what insiders are calling the most serious constitutional standoff since Watergate. And many legal scholars are arguing this situation is actually far worse. Federal funding for multiple agencies has been frozen solid, leaving hundreds of thousands of federal employees in financial limbo. Career diplomats with decades of experience are being recalled en masse from embassies around the world, leaving American foreign policy in shambles. Military leaders at the Pentagon are openly questioning the chain of command, with 3 admirals reportedly refusing to acknowledge certain executive orders they believe to be unconstitutional. This massive crisis is unfolding because Trump and Congress have reached a complete and total standoff over his attempt to unilaterally redirect $63 billion in congressionally appropriated funds. He wants to funnel this money toward his expanded border wall project, accelerated deportation programs, and a controversial new domestic surveillance initiative that civil liberties groups have called authoritarian. Congress, meanwhile, is desperately trying to maintain their constitutional authority over how taxpayer money gets spent. And guess who's stuck right in the middle of this constitutional earthquake? Every single member of Congress who took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They're being forced to choose between their oath and their political survival, and it's tearing the Republican Party apart. Before we go any further, let's be real for a moment. The situation is incredibly complex, with legal arguments on multiple sides, but the core issue is actually quite straightforward when you strip away all the political rhetoric. Can a president simply ignore Congress when it comes to spending taxpayer money? Can the executive branch override the legislative branch whenever it's convenient? These are the fundamental questions that will determine the future of American governance. Now, back to the matter at hand and the events that led us to this breaking point. Reports from around November 15th revealed just how absolutely furious Trump was with Republican senators who dared to question his authority. He labeled Senator Lisa Murkowski's proposed compromise as treasonous backstabbing, and even went as far as to say she was worse than any Democrat he had ever faced in his political career. He called her a disgrace to Alaska, a rhino of the highest order, and suggested that real Republicans should primary her immediately. And this wasn't a private conversation or a leaked recording. Trump made absolutely sure to air his grievances publicly on Truth Social for 6 consecutive hours, posting dozens of messages, making it crystal clear that he was not happy with any Republican showing even a hint of independence or willingness to compromise. This announcement sent shockwaves through the GOP, because it raised existential questions about the future of the party. If Trump, the undisputed party leader himself, could turn against moderate Republicans with such venom and fury, what did that mean for everyone else, scrambling to maintain their political futures? Every Republican senator and representative suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulder, wondering if they would be next. No. This pattern of demanding absolute loyalty and then discarding allies is nothing new for Donald Trump. His loyalty really only extends to himself, and this has been demonstrated time and time again throughout his political career. Remember Mike Pence, the man who stood loyally beside Trump for 4 years, defending every controversial statement, supporting every policy decision, never once breaking ranks publicly. And then January 6th happened, when Pence refused to do what Trump wanted, when he refused to overturn the election results, because the Constitution simply didn't give him that power. Trump turned on him instantly and completely. Trump's supporters, whipped into a frenzy, literally chanted about hanging the vice president while storming the Capitol. And what did Trump do? He remained silent for hours, watching it unfold on television, reportedly pleased that Pence was finally getting what he deserved for his disloyalty. That's the pattern. Show absolute loyalty for years, and you might survive. Step out of line once. Question 1, decision, and you're finished. Now, it looks like moderate Senate Republicans have found themselves in that same impossible position, stuck in the hot seat with no good options available to them. Here's where it gets really interesting and where the current crisis began to spiral out of control. This pattern of demanding loyalty and punishing independence has created an impossible situation for anyone trying to actually govern. So, what exactly did these senators do to earn Trump's wrath this time? Well, it all boils down to the Constitution's separation of powers and the fundamental question of who controls government spending. The impasse happened because Trump wanted to redirect $63 billion in congressionally approved funds to his border wall expansion, deportation programs, and domestic surveillance initiative. Congress, exercising their constitutional authority over appropriations, refused to authorize this redirection. Neither side was willing to budge, and as a result, multiple federal agencies simply shut down. As the crisis deepened into its 4th week, a group of Republican senators decided to take what they thought was a measured and responsible stance. They supported Trump's policy goals in principle. They agreed with his priorities on border security and immigration enforcement. But they refused to abandon their constitutional duties. They couldn't simply pretend that the separation of powers didn't exist. Their approach seemed reasonable on its face. Find a middle ground that would give Trump some of what he wanted, while preserving congressional authority over spending. Negotiate a compromise that both sides could live with. Isn't that how democracy is supposed to work? At first, Trump actually seemed to be on board with this approach. He appreciates displays of strength and unity, and the notion of Republicans standing together as a united front against the Democrats. He made some positive comments about the negotiating team and suggested a deal was close. But as the shutdown dragged on, stretching into its 4th week, serious problems started emerging that couldn't be ignored anymore. Essential government services ground to a complete halt. Passport offices across all 50 states closed their doors, stranding travelers and creating chaos for international business. Social Security offices stopped processing new claims. leaving millions of elderly Americans in financial uncertainty. National parks closed, sending tourists home disappointed. Food safety inspections were suspended, raising public health concerns. Tax refunds were delayed, hurting families who depended on that money. Air traffic controllers and TSA agents were working without pay, raising serious safety concerns at airports nationwide. While Trump's most devoted base remained steadfast in holding their ground, believing the shutdown was necessary to achieve important policy goals. The general public began to shift their blame toward Republicans. Poll after poll showed Americans increasingly frustrated with what they saw as a manufactured crisis that was hurting ordinary people for no good reason. Now, here's the kicker that changed everything. This was the moment Trump began to sweat a little. The moment he realized the political tide might be turning against him. You see, Trump values winning above everything else. He craves power. He obsesses over public perception. And he cannot stand being associated with failure. He definitely doesn't want to be tied to a shutdown that's hurting ordinary Americans, creating chaos, and making Republicans look bad. That's not the kind of victory he seeks. He wants to win big, to dominate, to crush his opponents. A messy stalemate that's eroding his support is the last thing he wants. And then moderate Republicans went ahead and made a move that, in Trump's eyes, was absolutely unforgivable. Senator Murkowski started actively looking for ways to compromise and figured she should work with Democrats on a bipartisan solution. She began reaching out across the aisle, having quiet conversations with moderate Democrats, exploring what kind of deal might be possible. She even considered supporting a continuing resolution that would fund the government temporarily while negotiations continued. Several other Republican senators signaled they might join her. It looked like a bipartisan coalition might actually come together to end the crisis. But when Trump caught wind of all this, through his network of loyalists and informants, he absolutely lost it. His reaction was volcanic. In Trump's worldview, compromising is just a sign of weakness, something that losers do. Working with Democrats isn't pragmatic governance, it's pure betrayal. Any Republican who dares to break ranks, for any reason, no matter how justified, is instantly labeled a traitor. Let's break this down to understand just how impossible the situation has become for Republicans trying to navigate this crisis. This standoff left moderate Republicans in an impossibly tight spot with no good options available. On one side, they desperately need Trump's backing to survive their primary elections. The MAGA base is fiercely loyal to Trump personally, and they will drop any politician like a hot potato the moment Trump gives the signal. A single negative tweet from Trump can end a political career overnight. On the flip side, these senators actually have to govern and face general election voters who aren't part of the MAGA base. That means figuring out how to keep the government running, maintain essential services, and not look like extremists who are willing to hurt ordinary Americans for political points. And accomplishing any of that requires some level of compromise and bipartisan cooperation. So they're caught in an impossible bind with no escape. They can either keep trying to please Trump, which means holding the line no matter what and refusing any compromise. But that only makes the crisis worse, hurts more Americans, and paints Republicans as unreasonable extremists. Or they can do their actual jobs as senators, which means working across the aisle to solve problems. But that will definitely make Trump turn against them with everything he's got. That's the mess Trump creates for Republican leaders. He demands complete and total loyalty. He wants them to fight without ever budging an inch. But then he points fingers and assigns blame when things go south. He's never shy about tossing allies under the bus whenever it suits his purposes. This whole scenario is causing major stress fractures within the Republican Party. If Trump has turned on Lisa Murkowski and is willing to publicly undermine his own allies, every single GOP senator is left wondering if they're the next target. Those moderates who are trying to balance serving their constituents with maintaining party loyalty are now worried sick about being the next one to get publicly humiliated and discarded. Meanwhile, the MAGA wing of the party believes Murkowski and the other moderates aren't fighting hard enough, that they're too soft, too willing to compromise, too ready to surrender. The party is literally tearing itself apart, with different factions pulling in completely opposite directions. Things became even more intense when Mitch McConnell, one of the most strategically brilliant Republicans in Senate history, broke away from Trump's position in a dramatic speech on the Senate floor. McConnell had been quietly pushing for a more sustainable solution behind the scenes, but he finally went public with his criticism, in measured but unmistakable terms. McConnell criticized Trump for creating an unnecessary crisis that was hurting millions of Americans. He reminded his colleagues of their oath to the Constitution. He suggested that there had to be a better way forward than endless confrontation. When someone as politically savvy as Mitch McConnell, a man who has navigated Washington politics for decades and who has generally supported Trump when it mattered, starts publicly turning against you, you know you're in serious trouble. But wait. There's more. The situation took a dramatic legal turn that nobody expected to happen so quickly. On November 18th, Judge Michael Patterson of the D.C. Circuit filed an emergency ruling that sent shockwaves through the legal and political worlds. The ruling stated in no uncertain terms that Trump's attempt to redirect funds without congressional approval was a flagrant violation of the Constitution's Appropriations Clause. Judge Patterson pointed out that the Founding Fathers specifically gave Congress the power of the purse precisely to prevent this kind of executive overreach. They had seen what happened when kings controlled both policy and spending. They designed the American system specifically to prevent any president from becoming a monarch. The legal process moved with unprecedented speed because Judge Patterson recognized the extreme urgency of the situation. Every single day, the crisis continued, meant more damage to democratic norms, more harm to public services, and more erosion of the constitutional order. And let me tell you, the judge absolutely did not hold back in his ruling. It was a devastating blow for Trump and his legal team. The judge declared that Trump's actions were constitutionally indefensible and represented a clear abuse of executive power. In legal terms, that's essentially saying you have no solid ground to stand on. There's no legal validity to what you're doing, and you're simply abusing the power entrusted to you by the American people. Judge Patterson, calling out Trump by name in such strong language, created an absolute firestorm. It's a significant move, a reminder that no president, no matter how powerful, is above the Constitution. This is a huge deal, the kind of judicial rebuke that simply doesn't happen in normal times in functioning democracies. Legal experts across the political spectrum immediately noted that we haven't seen a federal court rebuke a president this strongly since the Nixon era. And many argued this ruling was actually even more severe. Jonathan Turley, a conservative constitutional scholar who regularly appears on Fox News and who has often defended Republican positions, went on air and made a statement that should catch everyone's attention. He said, "The court's language is unusually harsh because the violation is unusually clear. This isn't a gray area of executive authority where reasonable people can disagree." Just think about that for a moment. When even conservative legal voices are saying the president clearly violated the Constitution. When scholars who normally support Republican positions are calling this indefensible. That tells you something significant. Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor and National Review columnist who has frequently defended Trump in the past, mentioned that if this ruling stands on appeal, it essentially tells Trump he cannot govern by decree. The implications for his entire second-term agenda are absolutely staggering. When legal experts from both sides of the political spectrum start using phrases like constitutionally indefensible and clear violation and abuse of power, that's the moment when everyone needs to stop and pay very close attention. And then everything changed in a way that nobody could have predicted. This is where Elon Musk enters the picture. And absolutely nobody saw it coming. Remember? Musk had been one of Trump's most prominent and valuable allies during this period. He had spent billions of dollars acquiring Twitter and transforming it into X, creating a platform where Trump's message could spread without the restrictions that had frustrated him on other social media sites. Musk had attended Trump's inauguration ceremony, sitting in a place of honor. He had hosted Trump at SpaceX facilities in Boca Chica, Texas, giving him tours of Starship prototypes. He had served as an unofficial advisor on technology policy. participating in calls and meetings about the future of American innovation. The relationship between the world's richest man and the world's most powerful politician seemed unbreakable. But something shifted. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable. Then it became impossible to ignore. The government shutdown started affecting Musk's businesses directly in ways he couldn't overlook. SpaceX contracts with NASA and the Department of Defense were delayed indefinitely, throwing launch schedules into chaos and threatening billions in revenue. Tesla's applications for new factory permits in Texas and Nevada were stuck in bureaucratic limbo, with no one available to process them. Starlink's federal partnerships, which were crucial for rural internet expansion, were completely frozen. But it wasn't just about Musk's own companies. He started hearing the same concerns from CEOs across Silicon Valley. Defense contractors, whose classified projects had ground to a halt. Tech executives watching their government partnerships evaporate overnight. Startup founders who couldn't get necessary regulatory approvals. Venture capitalists worried about investing in any company that depended on federal contracts. The message was consistent everywhere Musk turned. The chaos wasn't creative destruction that would lead to something better. It was just destruction. Innovation requires stability. Progress requires predictability. You can't plan a 10-year product roadmap when you don't know if the government will exist in its current form next month. Some say Musk simply saw which way the political winds were blowing and made a calculated business decision. But those close to him tell a different story. They say Musk was genuinely disturbed by what he was seeing. That his libertarian instincts, which had always made him suspicious of government overreach and concentrated power, finally kicked in. Musk has always been an iconoclast, someone who questions conventional wisdom and challenges authority. He's defied regulators, mocked politicians, and generally done whatever he wanted, regardless of what anyone thought. But there's a difference between questioning bureaucratic inefficiency and watching someone dismantle constitutional governance entirely. Musk apparently decided he had reached that line. Whatever the true reason, at precisely 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time on a Tuesday night, Musk posted a thread on X that would change everything and potentially alter the course of American history. He wrote that he had remained silent for too long. He admitted that he had believed disruption was necessary to shake up a calcified and dysfunctional system. He acknowledged that he had convinced himself the chaos was a feature, not a bug, a necessary demolition before reconstruction could begin. But there is a difference, he continued, between disrupting bureaucracy and dismantling the constitutional order itself. There is a line between shaking up the establishment and burning down the foundations that make civilization possible. What we are witnessing is not reform. It is not creative destruction. It is the death of the Republic in real time. And I can no longer stay silent. The internet absolutely exploded. Within minutes, the post had tens of millions of engagements and was spreading across every platform. Tesla stock, which had been struggling amid the political uncertainty, somehow surged in after-hours trading on the news. SpaceX employees began posting their support for Musk's statement. Tech leaders who had remained carefully silent for weeks, afraid of alienating either side, suddenly found their voices and began speaking out. But Musk wasn't finished. He followed up with another post that was even more explosive and quotable. He wrote that he had spent the past week speaking with engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and innovators across the country. People building rockets and electric vehicles, and neural interfaces and artificial intelligence. People trying to solve the hardest problems facing humanity. And they all told him the same thing. You cannot build the future on a foundation of lawlessness. Innovation requires stability. Progress requires predictability. Investment requires confidence that contracts will be honored and rules will be followed. No one builds a factory in a country where the government might collapse next month. No one commits to a 10-year research program when they don't know if federal funding will exist next year. And then came the line that would become iconic, shared millions of times, printed on t-shirts and protest signs. Mars will still be there when we fix this mess. That single sentence, Mars will still be there, became an instant meme. A rallying cry for everyone who believed the constitutional crisis had finally gone too far. It perfectly captured Musk's message. Yes, I want to reach Mars. Yes, I believe humanity's future is among the stars. But none of that matters if we destroy ourselves first. Some things are more important than even my biggest dreams. Trump's response came within the hour, and it was exactly what everyone expected. Pure fury. Undiluted rage. Vintage Trump. He called Musk a traitor, a fraud, and a massively overrated businessman who couldn't run a car company without government subsidies. He claimed Tesla was failing, SpaceX was overpriced, and X was a dying platform that nobody used anymore. He threatened to revoke every SpaceX contract with the federal government. He promised to launch investigations into Tesla's business practices, its safety record, its environmental compliance. He suggested that Musk's security clearances should be immediately reviewed and probably revoked. He even went after Musk personally, mocking his appearance, his marriages, his children, his accent. Nothing was off limits. Trump's posts on Truth Social that night were so vicious that even some of his supporters seemed uncomfortable. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that nobody predicted. Elon Musk didn't back down. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to smooth things over or walk back his comments. Instead, he escalated dramatically. Within hours of Trump's attacks, Musk announced he would conduct a live stream from SpaceX headquarters in Boca Chica, Texas. He promised to share what he had learned from conversations with tech executives, defense contractors, and government employees affected by the crisis. He said he had documentation. He said he had evidence. He said the American people deserved to know the truth. The announcement sent Washington into a panic. What did Musk know? What evidence had he gathered? What would he reveal? Who had been talking to him? The White House scrambled to prepare responses to unknown allegations. Republican strategists worried about what bombshells might drop. Democrats hoped for revelations that would accelerate Trump's downfall. The anticipation was absolutely electric in the hours leading up to the stream. Social media was flooded with speculation. Cable news ran countdown clocks. Political analysts offered predictions ranging from minor embarrassments to presidency-ending revelations. When the stream finally began at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, over 25 million people were watching simultaneously on X alone, with millions more on news networks that were carrying it live. It was one of the most watched live events in streaming history. Musk appeared calm, almost serene, standing in front of a massive Starship prototype that towered behind him like a monument to human ambition. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt. No notes. No teleprompter. Just Elon Musk, and a camera, and the attention of the entire world. He spoke for nearly 90 minutes. And what he revealed painted a deeply disturbing picture of an administration that had completely lost respect for legal and constitutional boundaries. Musk shared accounts he had gathered from SpaceX engineers who worked on classified government projects. They described arbitrary cancellations, politically motivated delays, and pressure to provide favorable treatment to contractors with White House connections. They talked about safety protocols being ignored when they conflicted with political timelines. He discussed what he had learned from Tesla executives dealing with regulatory chaos. Applications that sat unprocessed for months while competing companies with better political connections sailed through. Threats communicated through intermediaries. The message was clear. Loyalty would be rewarded, and independence would be punished. He revealed communications he had received from concerned government employees. People who had reached out to him through encrypted channels because they didn't know who else to trust. Text messages from White House staff asking tech companies to adjust their algorithms to suppress unfavorable news coverage. Emails suggesting that court rulings could simply be ignored if they conflicted with presidential priorities. A consistent pattern of treating legal constraints as obstacles to be circumvented rather than boundaries to be respected. Throughout the presentation, Musk was careful to protect his sources. He didn't name individual whistleblowers. He redacted identifying information. But the pattern he described was unmistakable and damning. The most damaging revelation came near the end of his stream, and it was something that nobody had expected. Musk disclosed that he had been approached by intermediaries connected to the White House with an unusual request. They wanted to know if he would be interested in a partnership to develop private security capabilities, separate from traditional law enforcement, that could be deployed domestically. The implication was that the administration wanted security forces that would answer to political leadership rather than being bound by normal legal constraints. When Musk expressed skepticism and asked for more details about legal authorization, the conversations had abruptly ended. Shortly afterward, he noticed that his relationship with the administration had changed. Contracts that had been moving smoothly suddenly encountered obstacles. Friendly calls stopped coming. The message was clear. Musk emphasized that he had no recordings of these conversations and couldn't prove they happened exactly as he described. But he felt the American people deserved to know that these conversations had occurred, that this was the kind of thing being discussed in certain circles. Now, let's touch on what all of this means for our institutions and for the future of American democracy. Chief Justice John Roberts has been working hard for years to keep the Supreme Court out of political battles, wanting the judiciary to be viewed as above partisan influence. He has sought to present the court as a neutral arbiter of constitutional questions, not a player in political disputes. But if this case reaches the High Court, and it almost certainly will, given its significance, they'll be wading right into the most intense political controversy in decades. Trump and his supporters are already poised to attack the entire federal judiciary as biased and corrupt. They're questioning the motives of every judge who rules against them. They're suggesting that the courts are part of a deep state conspiracy. This makes things incredibly complicated for the judiciary's image as neutral arbiters of law. Yet Judge Patterson probably felt he had no other choice. If he had stayed silent while Trump openly violated the Constitution, if he had found some procedural way to avoid ruling, the judiciary's credibility would have taken an even bigger hit. Sometimes judges have to make difficult decisions, even when they know those decisions will make them targets. This entire situation shines a massive spotlight on the separation of powers and what it means in practice. At the heart of the issue is a fundamental question about American governance. Can a president simply ignore Congress whenever he feels like it? Can the executive branch override the legislative branch through sheer willpower? Is the Constitution a binding document or merely a suggestion? If Trump gets his way on this question, it would fundamentally transform how our government operates. The founders designed our system with checks and balances specifically to prevent any single person from accumulating too much power. They had seen what happened in Europe when kings ruled without constraint. They created a system where power would be divided and balanced. Congress controls spending precisely so presidents can't become kings who rule by decree. The power of the purse is one of the legislature's most important checks on executive overreach. If a president can simply redirect funds without congressional approval, that check becomes meaningless. But Trump has always been uncomfortable with limitations on his authority. He craves total control over everything. He views constraints not as essential features of democratic governance, but as annoying obstacles created by his enemies. If his constitutional violations are allowed to stand, it represents a massive and permanent boost to executive power, and it opens the door for future presidents of either party to abuse that expanded power. Once you establish the precedent that a president can ignore Congress on spending, where does it stop? What other constitutional limits can be ignored when they become inconvenient? So the implications of this crisis reach far beyond just Trump and Congress and this particular moment. It's about shaping the fundamental structure of American democracy for decades to come. Each time Trump brushes aside norms, breaks laws, or attacks institutions, it weakens our democratic systems a little more. It makes behavior that used to be completely unacceptable start to feel normal and routine. Think about it carefully. If Trump can redirect billions of dollars without congressional approval today, what's to stop the next president from doing exactly the same thing? If he can ignore court rulings whenever they conflict with his preferences, what prevents future presidents from following that precedent? These violations of democratic norms don't just disappear when Trump eventually leaves office. They become part of our new political reality. The baseline for what presidents can do, and that's incredibly dangerous for the future of the republic. Democracy relies on norms and institutions, and the assumption that people in power will play by the rules, even when following those rules is inconvenient for them. When those norms crumble, when people start ignoring rules because they're confident they can get away with it, democracy itself starts to falter. Looking ahead to the 2026 midterm elections, it's clear that everything happening now is going to have significant effects on American politics for years to come. We're still over a year out from those elections, but the narrative being established right now will absolutely influence how they unfold. If the dominant story is one of Trump battling every institution and consistently coming out on the losing side, that spells serious trouble for Republicans in competitive districts and states. Voters generally don't reward chaos and dysfunction at the ballot box. They want stability and competence from their government. They want to know that essential services will continue, that their Social Security checks will arrive, that the government will function. Right now, Trump and Republicans aren't offering any of that. They're offering endless conflict and constitutional crisis. Democrats are already preparing to take full advantage of this situation in their campaign messaging. They're going to argue that Trump believes he's above the Constitution, that he doesn't respect the rule of law, that he's a threat to democracy itself, and they'll have Judge Patterson's ruling, Musk's revelations, and all the chaos of the shutdown to back up those claims. This is going to be their central argument in every competitive race. You can expect to see quotes from Judge Patterson's decision appearing in Democratic campaign ads, speeches, and debates across the country. It will be Exhibit A in the case that Trump and his enablers pose a fundamental threat to American democracy. But here's where the story takes yet another turn that nobody could have predicted in the aftermath of Musk's live stream. In the hours following his revelations, something unprecedented began to happen in Washington. The political dam started to break. 3 Republican senators who had previously been diehard Trump supporters, who had defended him through every controversy, who had voted against his first impeachment and his second, announced they would support the motion for removal. Their statements were careful and pained, acknowledging their previous support while arguing that a line had been crossed. Then 5 more senators joined them in quick succession. Then 10. Each announcement seemed to give others permission to break ranks. Politicians who had been privately agonizing for weeks finally felt they had cover to act on their concerns. Reports emerged from Mar-a-Lago of complete chaos inside Trump's inner circle. Sources described the former president screaming at aides, throwing objects, demanding to know who was leaking and who could be trusted. Advisors who had been loyal for years were suddenly seen as potential traitors. Everyone was under suspicion. Some staffers began quietly updating their resumes and reaching out to contacts about post-administration opportunities. The atmosphere inside Trump world had become toxic and paranoid, with everyone wondering if they would be the next target of Trump's rage. The MAGA base, so reliable for so long, began to show fractures for the first time. The majority remained fiercely loyal to Trump, dismissing Musk as a billionaire elitist who had never really been one of them, calling him a deep state plant and a traitor to the movement. But others, particularly those in the tech-adjacent wing of the MAGA coalition, people who had been attracted to Trump partly because of his alliance with Musk, began questioning whether they had been supporting the right cause all along. If Elon Musk, the ultimate disruptor, the man who had defied every establishment, thought Trump had gone too far, maybe it was time to reconsider. The emergency congressional session convened at 9 a.m. the following morning under extraordinary security. The Capitol building was surrounded by thousands of protesters on both sides of the issue, separated by rows of National Guard troops in full riot gear. Helicopters circled overhead. Snipers were positioned on rooftops. Everyone remembered January 6th, and nobody wanted a repeat. Inside the chamber, the tension was absolutely palpable. You could feel history being made with every passing moment. Speeches were given, arguments made, constitutional scholars cited, Democrats spoke of defending democracy. Republicans were divided between those defending Trump and those arguing for accountability. The procedural debates were intense. What exactly was being voted on? What was the legal basis for removal? What precedent would this set? Lawyers argued about constitutional interpretation, while politicians worried about their next elections. And then came the first vote that would help determine the fate of the Trump presidency. The initial count showed 52 senators in favor of beginning removal proceedings. It was a significant number, more than many had expected. But they needed 67 votes to actually remove a president. The gap seemed insurmountable. A second motion was introduced, calling for a formal impeachment trial with expedited procedures rather than immediate removal. This motion passed with 61 votes, a bipartisan majority that sent the matter to a special committee for investigation. It wasn't removal, but it was a significant step toward accountability. Meanwhile, the floodgates continued to open as more people decided to speak out. Whistleblowers emerged from agencies across the federal government, encouraged by Musk's example and by new legal protections that the Senate had hastily passed. Documents that had been carefully guarded began to leak. Recordings that officials had made for their own protection surfaced. The picture that emerged was of an administration that had systematically disregarded legal constraints. The White House went into complete crisis mode. Press conferences were canceled indefinitely. Access to the building was severely restricted. Journalists reported that even senior staff couldn't get clear answers about administration policy. Reports suggested that even Trump's most loyal aides, people who had defended him through scandal after scandal, were beginning to distance themselves. Some stopped returning calls. Others began speaking to lawyers about their own legal exposure. The circle of trust around the president was shrinking by the hour. As I speak to you now, the situation remains extremely fluid, with new developments happening almost hourly. The special committee has begun its work with remarkable speed, scheduling testimony from current and former officials. Subpoenas have been issued. Document requests have been sent. The legal machinery is grinding into motion. Musk continues to amplify whistleblower accounts on X, using his platform to ensure that revelations reach the widest possible audience. His follower count has surged by millions since the crisis began. Whatever happens politically, his influence has grown enormously. Trump has retreated to Mar-a-Lago, where he's reportedly isolated and increasingly erratic. Sources describe him watching cable news obsessively, calling allies at all hours to demand loyalty pledges, and considering options that his legal team has warned could constitute additional violations. Some advisors are urging him to negotiate, to accept some kind of deal that would allow him to leave office with dignity and avoid prosecution. Others are encouraging him to fight to the bitter end, to rally his base for resistance. The president himself seems to veer between these options, hour by hour, unable to commit to any consistent strategy. So here's the deal, and here's why this moment matters so much for everyone watching. An emergency session of Congress has been called to address whether Trump should face immediate removal for violating his constitutional oath. This isn't just about a government shutdown or a budget dispute or even a political disagreement between branches of government. This is about something much more fundamental. It's about whether the President of the United States can simply ignore the Constitution when it becomes inconvenient for him. It's about whether the rule of law applies equally to everyone, including the most powerful person in the country. It's about whether the system of checks and balances that has sustained American democracy for nearly 250 years will survive. If Trump gets away with this, if there are no consequences for openly defying the Constitution, then we're basically saying that constitutional limits don't matter anymore. That would mean we're stepping into a completely new realm of American governance, one where presidential power has no meaningful constraints, where Congress is reduced to an advisory body, where courts can be ignored whenever their rulings are inconvenient. It's about so much more than just this immediate crisis, as serious as it is. It's about whether we genuinely have a system of checks and balances, or whether we've just been pretending all along. It's about whether the Constitution is the supreme law of the land or merely a historical document with no binding force. There's also a darker question that nobody really wants to ask out loud, but that hangs over everything. What happens if Trump simply refuses to accept the outcome of these proceedings? What happens if he declares the entire process illegitimate? A coup by the deep state? An attack on the will of the people who elected him? What happens if he calls on his most devoted supporters to resist, to take to the streets, to fight back against what he'll surely describe as a stolen presidency? We've seen hints of this scenario before. On January 6, 2021. When Trump's rhetoric helped spark an assault on the Capitol itself, but this time, the stakes are even higher than they were then. The divisions are even deeper. The institutions are even more strained. And the outcome is even more uncertain. The next few weeks are going to be absolutely crucial in determining the future direction of American democracy. Will Republicans finally find the courage to stand up to Trump in sufficient numbers? Or will tribal loyalty prove stronger than constitutional commitment? Will Judge Patterson's ruling survive the inevitable appeals? Or will higher courts find ways to avoid the question? Will Musk's revelations prove to be the tipping point that shifts public opinion decisively? Or will Trump's base remain loyal regardless? Most importantly, can our democratic institutions survive this unprecedented assault? Are the systems designed by the founders robust enough to handle a president determined to break them? Or have we reached the point where those systems, stressed by decades of political polarization and norm erosion, finally begin to fail? We are all watching history unfold in real time. Every day brings new developments, new revelations, new twists that nobody could have predicted. The story is being written as we watch. And none of us, not the politicians, not the pundits, not the historians, really know how it ends. All we know is that the next chapter is about to be written, and the decisions made in the coming days and weeks will shape American democracy for generations to come. Everyone has a stake in what happens next. Everyone will be affected by the outcome, and everyone will be asked, someday, what they did during this critical moment. The stakes have never been higher, the evidence has never been clearer, and the future has never been more uncertain. Stay tuned, stay informed, and stay engaged. The Republic may depend on it.